Hi, my name is Michelle Krupa, and this is my summative final project for the class Positive Discipline, a Guide to Restorative Practices. This presentation is about positive and alternative discipline practices. Enjoy. Milburn's behavior management plan is focused around PBIS, and there are 3 levels of our PBIS model. One is the primary prevention level, which is all of the students at school. The second level is a specialized group. It's called Tier 2. And these are the kids that partake in CECO, which is check and check out for some high-risk behaviors. And then the third level is our highest level of managed discipline, which makes up about 1 to 5% of our student population. It's designed to reduce the frequency and intensity of our internal and external behaviors. The other picture is a matrix, which is what the school follows to manage expectations in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Restorative practices was the behavior management plan that I had looked into for an alternative discipline plan. And basically, a restorative practice addresses and discusses the needs of the school community. It builds a healthy relationship between the educators and the students. The goal is to reduce, prevent, and improve harmful behavior. You can repair harm and restore positive relationships basically by having discussions with your students and building a strong rapport. The main purpose for restorative practices would be for Milburn to essentially transition into this type of positive discipline management program fluidly. So that this picture kind of shows how there are different levels, just like there are with PBIS. The prevention skill building being the biggest, where most of the students would be. The next being the early intervention, where you have like peer mediation and conflict resolution training. And the last being where you have your intensive intervention, where this is where you're having restitution conferences with family or community group members or whatever else to manage the situation in a positive way. To transform our classrooms to prevent behavior problems, we can make 21st century classrooms which would integrate technology, digital citizenship, which basically educates our students on how they need to properly act with technology, and they need to be aware of the dangers of technology and how to use it appropriately. With that, there'd also be global connections, talking to people from the other side of the world through Google Chats or Genius Hour, where the kids get to take advantage of their learning and come up with something that they want to learn about. In addition to that, there are classroom accommodations that can be made to help transform our classroom to be more of a positive place, which can include the way we organize our desks, brain breaks, taking a few minutes and getting our brains off of what we're learning and concentrating on moving, getting a drink of water, whole brain teaching. That's just the way we can organize the management in our classroom, as well as cooperative learning, finding different ways for students to learn rather than the teacher being the main focal point, more of like a student-centered classroom. So Melbourne has a state-mandated social emotional learning program, which allows the students to understand how to use empathy and skills for learning, emotional management, and problem-solving skills. And basically, the program provides lessons on a variety of areas to help the students become better educated on the importance of being socially and emotionally aware of themselves as well as others. So second step is the program that Milburn uses. We teach it once a week to our students during a half-hour time span. The lesson plan that I submitted for my project was about disagreeing respectfully. And basically the lesson required the students to understand assertive skills, as well as how to disagree respectfully and how it strengthens the relationships and assists in avoiding misunderstandings and prevents aggressive conflicts. So the last bullet point talks about school-wide community support and how, as a school, everybody has to be on board with social emotional learning, because as you can see on the picture wheel, it gives the students the ability to understand social awareness, relationship skills, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, as well as self-management. Restorative justice is a component of restorative practices that basically implements talking circles, which is where the students can really get to know each other more, like kind of like a classroom meeting in the beginning of each day. And the discussions can be both positive and negative. It's really to get the students to get to know one another on a more personal basis. With that, you would build community, and then, as from the teacher to the student perspective, you can have positive conversations, especially when there is a behavior situation going on. The teacher can talk to the student in a positive way about what is going on and how they can change it for the better. And I had heard this quote on one of the videos we watched, which I really liked. And basically, the speaker had said that I don't agree with your behavior, but I care about you and I want to help. And I thought that was a great way to show the student that you care, even though the decision they made maybe not have been the best one. And lastly, the bullet point about peer jury is having your students be a part of that decision making when bad choices are made, and talking about how we can resolve them to make them better. I think before a teacher integrates any type of positive discipline into their classroom, they first must know what type of management profile they would have as a teacher. And so the picture on the left was a screenshot of the little quiz that we took to find out what type of classroom management style we had. And the results for mine were an authoritative management style. And so some attributes of that included having the teacher provide limits and controls on the students, but still encouraging independence. The students are reprimanded for bad behavior, but there's conversations that happen, and basically the student and the teacher can talk about what's going on and resolve it through discussion in a respectful way. A teacher who is authoritative is a warm and nurturing person who displays to the student comfort and kindness. And basically, a student that is receiving this type of management style is going to be receptive of that because they're looking for a teacher that is fair and kind. I think trauma is one of those things that not many teachers think about until it comes upon them. And so in my situation, I had a student who had a complex trauma, which is basically an exposure to multiple traumatic events that are invasive and of the interpersonal nature. And so I didn't go into details while I was describing this, but basically the trauma resulted in delayed academic development, which, like an example, was the inability to read, the necessity for occupational therapy, as well as social work. And so when we're considering integrating positive disciplines such as like restorative practices, we need to consider our students that are going through some type of trauma. So some modifications that we can make for those types of students would obviously to have a problem-solving team that could help with those issues. Your social worker, your behavior specialist, principal, vice principal, of course, the classroom teacher, maybe having them on a check and check out program that can assist with, tracking their behavior and meeting those emotional needs. Also, having accommodations or modifications in the classroom, such as modifying the classroom environment, like having a safe place for the student to go when they're upset so they can calm down, or providing options or choices. And then, of course, definitely maintaining a routine is key. As for trauma-informed care, as a Milburn staff member or any staff member at any school, you are considered a mandated reporter for any students who is deemed to be at risk or at harm. So that's something to be aware of. And lastly, for a trauma FYI, basically parents need to know about the second step curriculum, which includes empathy, social emotional learning, bullying, and child protection, which kind of goes along with trauma, so that the community is aware of these types of students and how we need to have support for them in a positive environment. Obviously, the most important place where the students need to feel like they're welcome and safe is the classroom. And so to ensure that positive behaviors are being exhibited in the classroom, there's kind of like a checklist that you should probably go through to ensure that you have the right type of classroom for your students. And, initially you're going to want to make observations on what works for those kids that you have in your classroom that specific year. Each year is different. The group of kids is going to be different. So you're going to want to make sure that you make those observations. And after you've made those observations, then you can set up the classroom and arrange it in a way that's going to define learning areas and make materials easily accessible to the students. Organization is key. You don't want to be a scatterbrain. You don't want your kids to feel scatterbrained while they're in your classroom. The mood is super important. Having plants, motivational posters, blank spaces are huge. Sometimes teachers are too worried about filling all the space in the room while they should kind of make room for the kids to make it their classroom. That's going to encourage positive behaviors when the student feels like they're part of the classroom community. And lastly, academics is obviously important in your classroom, and differentiating for the needs of each student and scaffolding your lessons is going to be essential to a successful classroom. So 2 videos that I thought were really great resources for positive discipline in the classroom were Why We Need Restorative Justice, which basically highlighted the issues regarding suspensions and expulsions and how most of the infractions that we are seeing that are taking place are a result of nonviolent behaviors such as tardiness, dress code violations, or inappropriate language. And so basically, the main message here is the importance of using restorative practices as a way to deal with the behavior issues and to create a positive, caring, and safe learning environment for our students. The second video is called Repairing Our Schools Through Restorative Justice. And in this video, the woman who's speaking discusses how students were not responding to restorative justice practices because many students had thought that they could only respond to a zero tolerance policy. And basically the lecture discussed how to change the classroom climate and environment to implement restorative practices to create a happier and safer learning environment for the students. So this video is really cool because it talks about how to change the classroom from teacher-centered to student-centered. And there's a lot of studies and research that states that it's super important to have a student-centered classroom versus a teacher-centered classroom, and how you can curb behaviors if you have your kids working collaboratively in a student-centered environment. And so the speaker had a lot of great ideas on how to transform your classroom into a 21st century classroom by doing things such as releasing the power, using technology, not feeding the fears, providing digital citizenship, making global connections, and essentially reinventing the skills of today for our students so that they're really taking charge of their own learning. So this video is really cool because it talks about, I believe what I learned most about this course was about restorative practice and restorative justice and how I can implement those as an alternate behavior plan in my classroom for sure, and hopefully at Milburn as a whole. The idea that you're building strong rapports with your students through trust and honesty and having those discussions to alleviate behavior problems in the classroom. What surprised me the most were the fact that there are still many schools that are expelling and suspending their students and devaluing their students on nonviolent actions such as tardiness or dress code or inappropriate language, and how talking about that with the students would definitely solve those problems rather than just suspending them or expelling them. So what are the next steps is my big question, because this is something that I definitely am interested in discussing with my building principal, the assistant principal, our PBIS team, and seeing how we can implement this to go away from the zero tolerance policy and focus more on positive discipline. And then lastly, how can what I have learned make a difference? I'm not really 100% sure how I'm going to make a difference just yet, but I know that, being educated on different ways to bring positive discipline into the classroom is huge. And, maybe displaying those practices in my classroom will kind of have a domino effect, and more teachers will see that their students are reacting in a positive way by using restorative practice and restorative justice, and it'll kind of catch fire. And then, after that, we can, get that buy-in and have those teachers really be interested in wanting to have positive discipline in their classroom. I believe what I learned